Good morning, and welcome to Allen Avenue Unitarian Universalist Church's in-person and online worship. I'm Erica Bartlett, and my pronouns are she and hers. I'm the chair of the worship committee. Our mission calls us to celebrate diversity, encourage spiritual growth, and promote social responsibility as we travel on and care for the earth. For those at home, if you're attending for the first time, please go to our website and fill out the welcome card so we can know more about you. Each month, Allen Avenue supports a nonprofit organization whose mission aligns with our Unitarian Universalist principles. The Share the Plate recipient for May is Bomazeen Land Trust. Bomazeen Land Trust is an intertribal Wabanaki initiative to heal our lands and people. This project is organized by Wabanaki people. They are dedicated to social and environmental justice and Wabanakiak, to protecting and honoring culturally significant spaces through the rematriation of ancestral land and the continuance of cultural practice and presence. To learn more about this organization, please go to their website linked on our order of service today. I'd also like to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Robert Ross, who pre-recorded his pieces for today. Dr. Ross is a retired professor in UU Final Fellowship and currently serves as consulting minister to the Unitarian Universalist Church in Brockton. Dr. Ross was a teaching fellow at Harvard and philosophy professor at Skidmore College. More recently, Dr. Ross was a professor at the University of Massachusetts in Boston and the Graduate Theological Union and Starr King in Berkeley, California, where he taught courses in philosophy and the study of religion. Published widely, his book, Walking to New Orleans, Ethics and the Concept of Participatory Design in Post-Disaster Reconstruction, was released in 2008, and he has just completed a second book, Theological Investigations, The Promise and Limits of Concepts of God. Robert is an active surfer, kayaker, and led the Cajun Zydeco band Les Cygnones. So we thank Dr. Ross for joining us, and to everyone here, we're so glad you've joined us today. We will now center our hearts and minds with the ringing of the bell.
Well, good morning, Portland. I bid you welcome to share in our worship together this morning and invite you to enter a moment of reflection in this sacred space. To worship together is to stand in awe of the many wonders around us, the canopy of stars in the cold blackness of night, the glow of flowers in the warmth of sunlight, the quiet wash of waves against the sand at the edges of the sea. To worship together is to share in silence, so to hear the voice of a tree stirring in the wind, to hear the passing shadow of a cloud. To worship together is to share in the dedication of our work, sharing the fruits of our endeavors with one another, sharing what we have with those who are in need. To worship together is to seek communion out of loneliness, as the dry desert cries out for rain. To worship together is to find kindred spirits with whom a fire burns within the heart as it burns within ours. To discover those whose lives we did not know, but with whom we seek equality and justice in the world we share, and with whom we may one day join in acts of kindness and love. And to worship together is to acknowledge the mystery within us that reaches out to seek those holy mysteries beyond us, the mystery of the private pain and joy of others, the mystery of the ways our other living creatures of nature who inhabit this earth with us and with whom we share their destiny, the mystery of the silence of the eternal, whose meaning we seek to incorporate into our lives. I bid you welcome to come together this beautiful Mother's Day morning. Our opening hymn is number 298, Wake Now My Senses. Please stand as you are able. Well, hello, all you young people. The story I'm going to tell you is about this long train that had to be pulled over a very high mountain. Now, there were these large engines in the yard, and they were asked to pull the train, but one by one, they all refused. And then the request was made of this small work engine, this little engine. All the other large engines mocked the little engine for even thinking about trying to get over that hill. Over 100 years ago, this story, and it was written by a Boston school teacher, it appeared under the title, The Pony Engine. Way back in 1954, I got an illustrated version under the title, The Little Engine That Could. So here's the story. Once upon a time, there was a little steam engine, a pony engine. Now, a pony engine, most of the time, just works around the freight yard, pulling a few cars on and off the switches, rearranging them for long trips. One morning, the little steam engine was waiting for the next call, so the pony engine was just sitting there with its steam pump pumping. If you ever get to see a steam engine, which there are not many around these days, that's the sound that it makes when it's just idling. But every now and then, the pony engine would toot its whistle just to let the boss know he was around. Now, the boss, Hector, he was the yard master. He had a long train of freight cars that had to be taken over this really big mountain up north. Mount Chugga Chugga Chugga, that's what all the steam engines called it, because it took a lot of work to steam over that mountain. And so Hector first asked the very largest steam engine in the roundhouse to hook up to the freight cars and take them over the mountain. After all, the great steam engine was built for just this kind of work. But the great steam engine whined, "I can't do it today, boss. That mountain's too much of a pull for me." Needless to say, Hector, the boss, was not happy. So Hector went to another steam engine and asked the same thing. "Look, we need you to hook up to the freight cars and take them over the mountain." But the other steam engine whined, just like the first. "Oh, I need repairs and I can't take them over the mountain today. I'm too tired." So the boss went to another steam engine and then another, but Hector heard the same excuses after each other. All the big steam engines refused to hook up. He had never seen steam engines so cranky. I bet you didn't know that a steam engine could be cranky. Well, today the engine house was kind of like a Krankenhaus. That's German for hospital. But at last, in desperation, Hector the boss asked the little pony engine to hook up to the freight cars and pull them up the grade, then down the other side. "I think I can," puffed the little locomotive. So it hooked itself up to the front of the heavy line of cars. The big steam engines thought that this was really a laugh, and so they tooted their steam whistles in derision, mocking the little pony engine. Well, as the pony engine pulled out of the freight yard and went on to the main line, the little engine kept bravely puffing faster and faster. "I think I can, I think I can, I think I can." And every time it neared a crossing, it would proudly toot its whistle in warning, just like the big engines did. It would go, "That's two long toots, one short toot, and one more coming to a crossing." In fact, I actually ran a big steam engine, a 282 Mikado once, and that's the signal you have to give when you come up to a crossing. But as the pony neared the top of the grade the larger engines had been afraid of, Little steam engine found itself going more and more slowly. And still the pony engine kept saying, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. But as it neared the top, it got very, very difficult. This was a really long train. It was a whole bunch of cars, all filled with coal. Coal cars are really heavy. So the pony then gave the engine a toot with every puff of steam. I think I can. I think I can. I think I can. What do you think happened? Did the little pony engine ever get over the mountain? Back at the freight yard, Hector, the yard boss, thought maybe he'd made a bad mistake. Hooking up a little pony engine to a big coal train. What was I thinking? Hector worried and he wrung his big hands. But the little pony engine did not stop steaming. I think I can. I think I can. And finally, he reached the top of the grade just by his own brave effort. Then the little pony engine and its long line of coal cars went down the grade on the other side of the mountain. And now the pony engine steamed to itself. I thought I could. I thought I could. Thought I could. I knew I could. So what do you think the moral of the story is? Well, if you think of hard things that you have to do and you say, I can't, that certainly will mean nothing will get done. But if you refuse to be daunted, if you keep on saying, I think I can, then that may just make it possible for you to say triumphantly, I thought I could, I thought I could, I knew I could. Then you can toot your own horn too.
Each week, our staff and volunteers create meaningful spiritual experiences. We have religious education programming, spiritual enrichment groups, and a variety of opportunities to create community. The funds we receive support all we do, and 1/3 will be shared with, where is it? With our Share the Plate recipient, and I can't find that right in front of me. It's there somewhere. There's a QR code on the back of the service if you want to contribute through that, and there is also a plate being circulated for cash or checks. If you're online, you can go to our website and use the donate button and indicate it's for the Share the Plate. This morning's offering will now be gratefully received.
Our reading this morning are the words of Martin Luther King, Jr. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied to a single garment of destiny. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. There are some things in our social system to which all of us ought to be maladjusted. Hatred and bitterness can never cure the disease of fear. Only love can do that. We must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love. Before it is too late, we must narrow the gaping chasm between our proclamations of peace and our lonely deeds which precipitate and perpetuate war. One day we must come to see that peace is not merely a distant goal, a goal that we seek, but a means by which we arrive at that goal. We must pursue peaceful ends only through peaceful means. Then we shall hew out of a mountain of despair a stone of hope. This morning, I want to talk about religious diversity in America and why it matters. 25 miles from my house rise the ornate domes of Sri Lakshmi. This is the New England Hindu temple in Ashland. It was consecrated in 1990. 5 miles from my house is the Islamic Center of New England in Sharon. It was founded on an old horse farm there in 1993. 2 blocks from my house is a new Islamic high school, Al Noor Academy. It was created from the renovated structure of St. Mary's, an old Roman Catholic church that had lain vacant for years. We are aware that we live in a culturally and religiously diverse world, but what is our personal knowledge of other religious traditions? Why should religious diversity matter to us? This morning's remarks is about religious diversity in America. What is America's actual religious profile? But I also want to focus on why the matter of diversity is so important and such a perplexing problem for us, and what we can do about it. So first, let's take a look at religious and cultural diversity in our history. Religious pluralism has been present in America from its beginnings. Now, of course, High school history books focus on the pilgrims who came from the separatist groups first gathered in 1580 by Robert Brown to split from the Church of England. These were mostly working class folks who went to Holland first to escape persecution. And then they sailed for the New World, aiming for Virginia, landing in what's now Provincetown on the Cape, ended up in Plymouth in 1620. Their goal was to ensure a free church, but one of highly individualistic beliefs, which is why I think you use take them to be kindred spirits. And our history books also mention the Puritans, these non-separating Anglicans who believed the Church of England could be reformed from within. They arrived in Salem in 1629. They set out to create a city on a hill, this social experiment to create a model community of Christian charity that became Massachusetts Bay Colony. But our high school history books don't talk much about the religious diversity of many others who came from Europe, Africa, and Asia. Some came to escape religious persecution, others for economic reasons. Quakers, Baptists, Catholics from France and Spain, Italy and Ireland sought ways to support their families in a new world. But they were followed by West Africans of traditional Yoruba and Dahomean faith, as well as Muslims. They were brought here as slaves. Then Buddhists and Confucians came from the Far East to work the mines and the railroads and the fields of the expanding West. Eastern European Jews populated urban areas, opening small businesses there. German pietist tradesmen and farmers migrated to the northern Midwest to build and to work the land. Sikhs from the Punjab intermarried with Mexicans in the fertile valleys of Central California. And all of this was on top of the diverse beliefs of native Indian tribal groups who were already living here. The predominant faith of America's early history was Christian. The founding fathers, to be sure, had an inkling of religious freedom, among other freedoms. But when the framers of the Constitution articulated principles of non-establishment of religion and the free exercise of religious practices, they certainly didn't have in mind the religious presence of Hindus or Buddhists or Sikhs or Muslims or Rastafarians. No Rastasman. And many of the founding fathers did not regard indigenous Indians as even fully human, let alone as possessing any religious sentiment. As our country grew into its adolescence in the 19th century, American culture was dominated by the values and prejudice of the old colonial gentry. This was a largely Anglo class, and their values were more Victorian than the England in which Queen Victoria reigned. They were a self-appointed elite, ministers, educators, reformers from the Protestant middle class of the Northeast. They assumed cultural leadership. Their mission? To discipline our turbulent and growing society. They saw themselves as apostles of culture, preaching virtues of character, moral integrity, self-control, industriousness, all activities, both, both work and leisure, should be constructive. Hard work is what it was going to take to curb our animal passions. Even leisure should not be spent in idleness, but in morally edifying activities. But all this began to change by the end of the 19th century. Immigrants were coming in increasing numbers, especially after 1890. And then Cultural and religious diversity blossomed. By the early 20th century, there was this growing urban working class of ethnic minorities arose. They had no ties to the old self-appointed custodians of culture. This was a new, more egalitarian social awareness, muckraking against evil business practices, the seeds of feminism, public education for all. Taken together, that social order that had been ruled by the genteel upper class all began to crumble. It all came tumbling down. But now, how was the changing character of American culture displayed? Well, one striking expression could be seen in these new amusement parks that were being built at the turn of the century. Boston's Paragon Park, Revere Beach, Atlantic City, Chicago's White City. But the quintessential amusement park of Coney Island in New York, these parks reflected this new mass culture. In its heyday of Luna Park and Dreamland, Coney Island contained a hurly-burly of exotic attractions that represented a vast array of cultures. Mosques and pagodas, Viennese streets, Turkish bazaars, South Sea Island huts, German and Irish castles, Indian teepees. Tourists, they came to gawk at the extraordinary panorama of the world's peoples. Egyptian swordsmen and jugglers, Dahomean drummers, Sudanese sheiks, Javanese carpenters, Hungarian gypsies, Eskimos, Chinese, Laplanders, Swedes, Syrians, Samoans, Sioux. The language of the amusement park guidebooks promised, "We bring you their manners, customs, dress, religions, legends, amusements, so that you might know them better." But have we gained any personal knowledge of other religious traditions? Our awareness of other cultures and their religious sentiments and practices has remained essentially that of the midway gawkers. We are onlookers who notice people in their various religious dress, Hare Krishnas at the airport, Sikhs driving taxicabs, Chinese Buddhists in their bonded Chinatown. There are people whose religiousness we see among us, but we see them at a distance. In the 21st century, it has become clear that the presence of other cultures and other religious traditions can no longer be seen at a distance. It is neither desirable nor possible. The demographics of America's major cities have changed. Atlanta, Dallas, Detroit, Houston, Los Angeles, Miami, New York City, Washington, D.C., Springfield, Massachusetts, all are now minority majority cities. And yet when we reflect on the American psyche, we run into the perplexing contradiction. Our country has been both a crucible of inclusion and the arena of intolerance. Lyndon Johnson signed the Immigration Act on July 4th, 1965, opening the United States once again to immigrants from all over the world. Since 1924, a restrictive quota system had cut off all immigration. Entry from Asia was especially limited. The 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act excluded not only Chinese, but also Japanese and Koreans. The restriction turned on a 1790 statute, the Naturalization Act of 1790. That barred Asian Americans from becoming citizens. And in 1922, in the case Takao Ozawa versus United States, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the Naturalization Act of 1790, declaring that Asians were outside the range of free white men who became or who could become citizens. So do we understand this paradox of inclusion and intolerance? How do we account for the contradiction that our country, framed as a crucible of inclusion, has been an arena of intolerance? We have to recognize that the drive towards sameness in American culture has always been a strong one. America is a melting pot. Now, the melting pot image is simultaneously appealing and repelling because it embodies the peculiarly American inconsistency of inclusion and intolerance. The melting pot image implies that foreign cultures are assimilated into America only by removing their previous cultural history and identity, and then smelting them, as our Ralph Waldo Emerson once put it, smelting them into a new race. There's this well-known cartoon from the early 20th century, and the cartoon depicts immigrants dressed in their ethnic clothing, mostly from Eastern Europe, their lederhosen, frilly frocks, clunky shoes. And all these new immigrants are depicted on this wheel of change, like a giant Ferris wheel. And as the wheel turns, these ethnic Eastern Europeans are dipped into a flaming melting pot. Then they rise again as new Americans in their standard house dresses and business suits, and they're all carrying little American flags. The implication was clear. It would take the refining fire of the melting pot to purge everything that was foreign, everything archaic or incomplete, imperfect. The old culture must be consumed in fire and then eliminated before the new American culture could be reborn. Why do we need to come to terms with our religious diversity? What are examples of why we need to? What's at stake for us? Quite simply, it is that there should be no place for hate in America. So the main ethical principle is very straightforward. No place for hate in the land claiming to be the home of the free. The unfortunate reality of our religious pluralism, however, is that it is not a vision that brings America together. Religious diversity is part of the fabric of America, and yet it tears us apart. Ignorance, fear of other cultures and their religious traditions, all of this, tragically, has led to crimes of hate. In Jersey City, New Jersey in 1987, the bindi, that's the dot on the forehead of many Hindu women, it became the focus of aggressive racists. The thugs called themselves dot busters. Interestingly, they really were not motivated by a hatred of specific Hindu religious practices. They just felt this wholesale repulsion towards the South Asian community, which numbered about 15,000 in Jersey City. In a letter written to the local newspaper, the Jersey City Dot Busters, they wrote, "We hate Indians. If you had to live near them, you would also. We will go to any extreme to get Indians to move out of Jersey City. If I'm walking down the street and I see a Hindu and the setting is right, I will hit him or her. We use the phone books to look up the name Patel. Have you seen how many of them there are? They are a weak race physically and mentally. We will never be stopped." A 1991 publication entitled Racial and Religious Violence in America, A Chronology, lists over 650 pages of acts of violence based on racial or religious prejudice from colonial to modern times. For example, newspaper and television media made us aware of a rash of arson attacks on Black churches, especially during 1995 and 96. But below the radar of national public media have been the arson and bombings committed at so many other places, at Hasidic schools and synagogues, at Islamic centers, at Hindu or Khmer temples. And sometimes there's a historical precedent, eerily present in these acts of violence. 1989, for example, the Hindu temple in Troy, Michigan. It was vandalized on the very anniversary of Kristallnacht. And that was the devastating night on which Nazis destroyed synagogues and smashed the storefronts and the windows of Jewish merchants all over Germany. Hate crimes are often a response to images and symbols of religious identity that are simply not understood, rather than to specific elements in the theology or rituals of unfamiliar religious traditions. So the vandalism becomes directed at religious artifacts like clothing, the Muslim hijab, the Buddhist saffron robe, or directed against iconography, statues, or sculptures on the edifices of Hindu temples. But the intention of hate crimes is ultimately to intimidate and to eliminate unwanted groups of people. And not all hate crimes are indirect. Face-to-face hatred happens as well. Back in Jersey City, an Indian Hindu immigrant was beaten to death by a gang. And within weeks, a second Hindu, a resident in medicine at a local hospital, was assaulted with baseball bats, left unconscious in a coma. On rare occasions, confrontation has been transformed into reconciliation. In August of 2000, the Boston Globe reported a Vietnamese temple in Roslindale being subjected to increasing vandalism. The destructive attacks were directed first at its tall white image of Kuan Yin, the female bodhisattva of compassion. Then they were directed at the sanctuary itself. Surprisingly, the Vietnamese temple leaders made a genuine decision, and they invited those very vandals to a picnic. And they came. And this unusual kindness set on the minds of the mixed Latino and African and Caribbean Asian community of Roslindale and on the vandals themselves. The leader of the Latino gang, Angelo, was accepted by the very people he had violated. In turn, Angelo became the temple's guardian angel. This young man represented a foreign culture within a foreign culture. But now he had come to know what his Vietnamese neighbors were like, face to face. So from personal encounter, an act of hate was transformed into the beginnings of a shared community. In the end, one wonders just what is it really that the religious bigot wants to keep out of American society? In late 1930, on his last visit to America, the Bengali poet, Nobel Prize laureate Rabindranath Tagore remarked, Jesus Christ himself could not get into the United States. In many ways, America was born as a religious haven. America was created and nurtured under principles of religious freedom. But these principles were neither universally nor consistently applied. What we have failed to recognize then and now is that religious freedom creates religious diversity. That is the legacy of our national origin that we must understand, perhaps for the first time. We are a people of diversity. We must reclaim the deepest meaning of our principles of religious freedom. We must acknowledge America as a truly pluralist society, one where religious diversity is not simply tolerated, but is understood as the very source of our strength. America is now, in fact, the most religiously diverse nation on earth. but before the last administration's restriction. Recent immigration has brought Buddhists from Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, China, Korea, Hindus from India, East Africa, Trinidad, Muslims from Indonesia, Bangladesh, Pakistan, the Middle East, Nigeria, Sikhs and Jains from India, Zoroastrians from Iran and India, Afro-Caribbean traditions from Haiti and Cuba, Jews from Russia, and now especially Ukraine. Even within the face of American religions, that has changed. Within Christianity, for example, there are Latino, Filipino, Vietnamese Christian Catholic communities. They're Korean Presbyterians. Many Chinese, Haitians, Brazilians are Pentecostal Christians. As Unitarian Universalists with belief in religious freedom is perhaps our single most shared article of faith, we are uniquely positioned to voice this message and to act on it. But our voice is not enough. We must live our belief in the sacredness of religious freedom. We must live the belief that our cultural and religious diversity is not something to be tolerated. We must live our belief that religious diversity is the source of our strength as a nation. As Unitarian Universalists, are we prepared to do that? Really do that? Are we prepared, for example, when religious diversity includes those of faith traditions UUs often scoff at, feel uncomfortable with, like the storefront evangelicals, or those Pentecostals who writhe in ecstasy, even roll on the ground when they feel the presence of God here in our midst among us, they would say. When I was a UU interim minister in New Bedford for 3 years, I also served as police chaplain working with the gang unit. I taught an anti-bullying, anti-violence course in the New Bedford public schools. And what I saw was that it was members of the Hispanic evangelical storefront churches and the Holy Roller Pentecostals who came with us when we did weapons collections or held neighborhood peace marches. Where were the UUs? Safe at home, thinking up their statements of conscience, no doubt. So we have to think about the consequences of religious freedom and religious diversity in all forms, comfortable and uncomfortable. Most of all, we have to be willing to get our hands dirty, as Sartre once put it. We have to do more than simply stand on the side of love, because simply standing on the side of anything is not enough. So I ask you in closing, what is America's religious profile? And what is its meaning in terms of our faith, our beliefs, and our actions? Because believing is an action, after all. Statements of belief, believing, is what philosophers like J.L. Austin call a performative. It's an act of doing something, an act of committing something. The words commit you to something. How are we prepared to act on behalf of others whose religious faith may be far different from our own, but which is nevertheless the expression of their culture, the expression of their freedom of conscience? What ought to be America's religious profile? Our closing hymn is number 159 in the hymnal, "This is My Song." And again, let us please stand as you are able. For our closing benediction, I share with you these words. May the eternal Spirit of life bless and protect you. May the eternal Spirit smile upon you and on all whom you hold dear. May eternal life be with you always and forever. So as I say, go in peace this morning, remember that we must continue to exercise good health hygiene, and at times even still practice social distancing when necessary, as the coronavirus hopefully reaches its last stages of presence in our midst. Remember, when you do go out in peace, let's be careful out there. And go home and hug your mother.